Sure, it was exactly the sort of thing we hope to have here at Georgetown. And I really also want to thank all of you from the Georgetown community and the community around town for coming. I'm going to use the prerogative of being the moderator to ask you a couple of opening questions, and then I very much hope we can open it up to all of you in the room to take a couple of questions. And I thought I would start by picking up on one of the themes that you mentioned in your, which is you talked about the fact that in the late 1980s through the 1990s, there's a period where I think many of us all hoped we could have a world where war was receding, where the security issues were not as dominant as they had been in the previous decades. I think today we're seeing security issues back at the forefront of geopolitics. We have Donald Trump waging a war in Iran today, well, ceasefire, but recently waging a war in the Middle East. We have obviously Putin's unjustified war against Ukraine. We see Europe very focused on rebuilding its defense space. But as I think about the future of the world on both security and on economic issues, it seems to me that we need the economic toolkit. The economic toolkit is, if anything, more essential than ever. Even as we focus on the security issues, we depend on global trading relationships to build our defense industrial base. We depend on development and partnership tools to actually strengthen alliances for this era of geopolitical competition that we're in. How do you see the interplay between the kinds of economic tools that you oversee with Global Gateway, that your colleagues who focus trade handle, the kinds of tools that they have, and the increasingly securitized hard power world we seem to be living in again?
Well, this is something what I can call a forward-looking approach. If you simply postpone, this is like with a serious disease. If you postpone healing, basically the first symptoms, the consequences will become much more expensive and more dramatic. And there is the weather change. Europe still believe that the fight against climate change matters. We spend a lot of money, maybe sometimes striving for perfection might become relatively expensive. But if you visit Africa or Caribbean, where I'm coming from, and you tell them there is no climate change, they will probably think you are coming from a different planet. And of course, climate events creates instability. And instability doesn't know borders. So instability means that the second issue is poverty and basically economic development. And the third topic is demography. We see that, Africa, despite all the tools, is not developing. If you take the so-called global manufacturing output, they are still stacking below 2% in Sahel, even 1% or something. On the other side, the demographic growth is tremendous. The average age there in some of the countries is below 20. So see on one side aging population, for example, what does it mean? It means that, for example, in Africa, we will see up to 50 million newcomers to the labor market in 5 years. If we do not create a job for them, and sustainable job, in combination with wars, like a climate change and poverty, it is basically a strong reason for migration. So by investing in these countries, we are investing also in Europe's future, tackling the root causes of certain things. But investing means not just to build a bridge between the mine or the road between the mine and the port. You should help them to add value on their own soil, to create a basic for the local value chains, for the local value addition, to create a quality jobs, to allow them access to the education. So I believe this is the way we see on the Chinese example that the investments they are bringing are not contributing to the growth of the wealth in these territories. And what we want to offer is an alternative. We do not compete. We are simply offering the alternative because basically our offer is based on co-invention, co-creation. We are trying to talk to the governments to identify their needs and to invest in the areas where they believe it will help them. On the other side, it is basically following our principles when it comes, for example, to sustainability.
Let me pick up on another sort of more specific topic you brought up in your remarks. You talked about some of the global gateway investments that you've been overseeing in Zambia. The U.S., as you know very well, is also quite focused now on investing in the Lobito corridor in that sort of region in Southern Africa, and DRC, and Zambia and elsewhere. How do you see cooperation going between your American counterparts and yourself, as well as other partners, in kind of making investments together, making investments collectively in that part of the world? And do you see that the way in which governments are cooperating there as a model for sustainable cooperation on critical minerals and other sort of strategic supply chains elsewhere?
Well, of course, the change in the foreign development policy that was for the whole system a big hit, because Europe being by far the biggest contributor with approximately 90 billion euro yearly, which basically creates around 42% of the global contribution. So basically 6% of the people with around 15-16% share on the global GDP was contributing with 42% to a global development agenda, is not able to replace 50 billion coming from the US. So of course we were the first address being approached, however, we understand this because we have a similar way of thinking. It's like a turn to trade and no aid, because we also believe that to invest in job creation, value chains is just better than basically send money. And I am in regular touch in Mr. Boulos, the senior advisor to President Trump on Africa. However, of course, there is a big space for improvement, for like a much deeper cooperation, which I believe will be more beneficial for both, for Europe, for US, but also for our partner countries, because this is not about the impact. This is not about what we create, but this is also about deterring our, let's call it, systemic rivals or adversaries. So wherever we leave space, and I of course understand that there is a much more focus on Americas than, for example, from the West side, but mainly by cooperating, by sharing the responsibilities, we can achieve that the vacuum which might be created if we are not active will be fulfilled by powers we don't like to see there. And I'm talking mainly about the Pacific, which is becoming a battlefield for maritime routes, ports, or digital connectivity and subsea cables. And the Chinese presence and the Chinese effort to influence, to impact the politics, including like offering security agreements with physical presence of the Chinese policemen or whatever, is big. And this is something where I believe we have pretty much a joint interest.
So one of the trends, you brought it up in your previous answer, one of the trends we've obviously seen in the US is both a reduction in overall levels of aid flows, but I would also say one thing relatedly we've seen out of the US, particularly under this administration, but even under the Biden administration in which I served, was a little bit less of seeing development objectives as just development objectives and a little bit more of a focus on how can we foster development while securing our own interests. So you were already seeing a pivot, develop from development in Africa purely for development objectives to development in Africa that also secures critical mineral supply chain or that, secures other kind of strategic resources. There are arguments in favor of that. And as I say, even the Biden administration is beginning to, I think a little bit more self-interestedly about how we did development assistance. As you think about Global Gateway and Europe's projects in this space, how do you think about the balance of you want development objectives, you want to pursue development objectives for the benefit of sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. You also very much do want access to critical minerals. You want to see European firms and not firms from strategic rivals like China getting embedded in these economies. How do you think about the balance between the kind of development goals and the economic security goals that Europe might be serving?
I think they can go in line under the condition that there will be a mutual benefit. So that there will be benefit for all involved parties. And after 30 years in a banking, in basically private business, I learned to believe that if there is not a long-term benefit for all involved parties, then basically the lifetime of the deal will be very short one. So I believe in this, in mutual benefit rather than in zero-sum games. So what you need to offer is when you want to benefit, that the others will be allowed to benefit together with you. And this is basically the necessity. Therefore, our projects are built on capacity building abroad in the partner countries. I was talking about the Kobaloni. We have a high iron in Namibia, Namibia is known for the longest train in the world, which is basically just shipping the iron ore, which is then being processed somewhere in China. And this is a country with an unlimited sunlight, with very favorable conditions where basically the sea is helping the fog coming in the night from the sea screening the solar panels. And there is a lot of, so you can have oceans of the solar panels, so you have a very cheap electricity. And we are using this electricity for production of the green hydrogen, which is being used for the production of so-called directly reduced iron. So you produce iron from the iron ore, you consume 2/3 of the energy needed for the production of the high quality steel in the country where it is extremely cheap. And instead of the iron ore, you can in the future ship the pellets, the raw iron, and then to process it to a high quality steel, US or in Europe. So, and we are supporting the mining university there together with the private companies, and I should not forget them. We are basically shaping jobs or education where basically the people from the university are going then directly to satisfy the needs of the companies. So we are creating a very high hydrogen know-how in Africa. Kobalone, I was talking about the very first refinery. So they are getting jobs they need, high quality jobs. They are getting local supply chains, and we are getting like a privileged access to the processed critical raw materials. So this is basically how we understand also our role. And of course, we want to do it mainly with the involvement of the companies coming from, let's call it the democratic part of the world. Of course, European companies in our programs are preferred based on the European standards, because this is what we want to promote there. What is good for the European people and the European consumers should. So our rules when it comes, for example, to sustainability, because this is then our contribution to the protection of the planet and the contribution to the decarbonization targets. So this is basically the way how we believe it can work. So we want to empower the countries, not to entrap them. Yeah, there are examples. I am a former banker. Loan can be like a fire, a very good servant, but very bad master. And if you see, for example, the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, where China offered Sri Lanka, they will basically give them a loan for the port. Sri Lanka was finally not able to repay the loan. Question is, was the calculation wrong? Was the grace period, whatever? So under the threat of the sovereign default, now is the port for 99 years under the ultimate control of China. I don't know how much it is contributing to the wealth growth in Sri Lanka. So this is basically not the way we want.
Well, let me open it up for questions. I think we have time for one or two. I did just want to say one disagreement, Commissioner. I think here in the U.S. we wouldn't want iron pellets. We tariff them at 50%. But hopefully that's not, forever going to be. Hopefully that's not forever going to be the case here in the United States. And I'm glad they're wanted in
I
Europe.
didn't want to mention only Europe.
Yeah, I just have to, stay for the record here in Washington. Yes, please, and please introduce yourself.
Hello, Commissioner. My name is Doris McCarley, and I had the pleasure of working with the previous commissioner as part of the high-level steering committee hosted by UNESCO on education. And my question is, given that you're balancing strategic goals and also balancing development goals in Africa, what is the role in terms of investment in education and incremental investment that requires, let's say, 20 years, given the bulge of young people coming to Africa playing a role day-to-day? Given the previous commissioner was very big fan of education. Are you still a fan of education?
The education but also the science and research.
Yes.
Are playing extremely important role. So basically, the human-centric approach to invest not only in the hard assets, but also in the soft assets like education and health. And I was mentioning the example of the vaccine production. This is not only about technical production. I was meeting recently one of the discoverers of the cure against the Ebola virus. And he was saying, 30 years ago, when we were tracing basically the virus or whatever, we were sending everything to Europe to get the results. Now we can do it, in Africa, it's much faster. And then because, and this is the part of our responsibility. So the big part of our programs are collaborations with the universities. This is also based like commission-shaped programs, access to the Erasmus, getting the education in Europe. For example, the mentioned example with Namibia, the guys are very often studying, for example, in Germany, in Europe, but of course, vocational training, which the people are getting on spot. Because I think this is the part of what the people are looking for when we are talking about a sustainable future. To have a healthcare, to have access to the education, so to have a sustainable future. So we have a special programs for this, and this is very important part of our value proposition. So this is not only about the hard assets. This is not about railways, corridors, mines, but the training. And sometimes we have the discussions with the local governments. They are saying, but China is offering to build it much faster than you. And I am telling them, okay, and what is the learning curve? They send their own workers simply for each and every brick, and so your people will learn nothing. Our approach is to send the experts and to work together with your people. It takes maybe longer, but there will be a learning curve, and next time we do it much more together, and maybe for a third time you will be able to make it alone.
Take another question. Yeah. IIEL, the World Bank. Thank you, Commissioner, for coming and speaking with us. You mentioned that European Union is a lifestyle powerhouse. I don't know if powerhouse was the word, but refer to the lifestyle. What about European Union as an innovation powerhouse? There's a lot attention now to technology and innovation, and my concern is that Europe is seen less and less as a place for innovation. Yet it's
your concern?
Is it my concern? Okay. And I think everyone else probably who is looking at this space, because innovation plays a critical role in international development. So my question is, how the Global Gateway and your agenda is connected with the European agenda to promote more competitiveness and innovation within?
Well, I think that this is one of the I said lifestyle superpower was that superpower, and that I have a reason for this. Because to be very honest, I think underestimating Europe when it comes to innovation or competitiveness is basically one of the major mistakes. If we talk about the growth and about the wealth, so for example, like a GDP, of course, US will be probably ranked higher than Europe. But if we talk about quality of life, so how you translate the wealth in the well-being, the access to the education, health, security, democracy, then I tend to really believe that Europe is the leading superpower. The Human Development Index, so based on the HDI, Europe is an absolute global leader in the quality of life. The Social Progress Index, then you have the World Competitiveness Ranking, and I will be pretty happy to share the results with you. So, for example, when it comes to Human Development Index, I think Europe holds 7 of the top spots in social progress and the top 6 in the human development progress. And from the 30 countries, ranked the top 30 countries in the world, 20 are European ones. So good governance and education matter more than the market size. And like the global competitiveness ranking, the number 1 Switzerland, in the top 10 Denmark, Sweden, and Ireland. US is ranked number 13. China number 16, okay, Germany number 19. So also when it comes to like a broader view of the competitiveness, Europe is still very good ranked. Then the basically structure of the public finance, so this exclusive AAA club based on the rating agencies. So 7 of the 9 countries with the most healthy fiscal structure are European. US doesn't enjoy the AAA status because of the indebtedness and certain political instabilities. And when it comes to innovation, this is a very special issue, because Europe is a very innovative continent with a much more fragmented like a research and science and research base coming from the universities and from the smaller companies. So not being dependent on only few giants. So, for example, if you take the HIV medication, so the roots of the cure are coming from my home country. The issue of Europe and where the US is much better is how to basically monetize the results. And this is linked to the structure of the capital markets. Because if you take the map of the North America and you say stock exchanges and commodity exchanges, you will see only few dots. If you take Europe, you will see in each and every country 2 up to 3, like a stock exchange, commodity exchange, rather joke than really powerful institutions. This is also the structure how to finance basically, or how to materialize the results from the science and research. Because in Europe, the capital markets are not working. Therefore, we have this initiative to create like a savings and capital union, because we have plenty of private deposit sleepings on savings and current accounts, which are not working in favor of economies and not in favor of peoples. In the US, the 1/3 of financing is coming from equity markets, 1/3 for a bank, and the 1/3 is the real from capital markets, and 1/3 is real equity. We doesn't have it in Europe. We have in the developed countries maybe 30% of equity, and the rest is financing from the bank. So therefore, sometimes the research teams are then going to US, selling their ideas to help the idea to become a good. But I think that the innovation and science and research base in Europe is pretty good. The reason why then basically the ideas are being monetized, if I can call it in that way, is basically the structure of the financing and the powerful capital markets in the US now. So to raise money and to make the then idea to a product is definitely easier here than you now. On the other side, the US is taking a big benefit from this, because if you just take the foreign debt of the US, so when it comes to foreign ownership of the US debt, then the half is in the hands of Europe. And when so therefore, I believe that strong Europe is also of a big interest of the US, because there is a pretty good balance. And both continents are still representing really trade-wise globally very important market, having responsibility for millions of the jobs.
Add one final thought, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to close to let the commissioner get to his next thing. You know, it's interesting. I think there's such a history of joint innovation between the US and Europe, so many technologies. So to give an example that I've been thinking about lately, a few years ago, obviously we were all thrilled here in the US and in Europe to have mRNA technology for COVID vaccines. The first US government grant to support mRNA research was made by the Defense Department in 2013 to Moderna and BioNTech, European companies to do research in Europe that then, nearly a decade later had enormous benefits to all of us from that research that was supported by the US government in Europe a number of years before. And I think there's such a huge potential for joint research, American, that we may, maybe it's good for Europe, we may right now be giving Europe an innovation advantage by closing off our universities and by some of the attacks we are making domestically to our own sort of pillars of innovation here in the US, which I worry is not going to be great for us. Maybe we'll provide an opportunity for Europe to bring researchers and others to do research there. But I really do think over the longer term, putting aside what's happening in the short term, there's so much potential on the research side and the innovation side. together. But Commissioner, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure to host you here. Thanks to all of you for coming. Really appreciate your time. Please join me in thanking the Commissioner.
Thank you.